going to talk today about the readmission measure and how it affects the stars and things that are misunderstood. One of the things I'll note is that we are doing a 5-series session. Today is the first one. Next week is really exciting. It'll be about CAPS, and we're going to dig into case mix adjustment, an area that a lot of people don't quite understand. I think it's good timing because Plan Preview 2 and CAPS results should be coming out around that time. So get a chance to sort of understand those underlying performance issues. There'll be some other topics in the next few weeks. If you want to register, there's the link below, but reach out at the end if you can't get the links. Today's objective, I want you to leave with a very clear understanding of plan all-cause readmission measure, how it's calculated, so that ultimately you can improve your strategies and star ratings. This is a 30-minute fast-paced training. Unfortunately, I normally like to talk and interact with people, questions as I go, but the topic is pretty dense. We need the full 30 minutes. So what'll happen is I'll be presenting the topic, going through all the content. At the end of the 30 minutes, you've got your training, you can move on. If you have questions, want to discuss something, want to chat about readmissions, I'll stay on. We can do Q&A after the fact, but you don't have to be there. You're not going to miss anything other than some interesting topics. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. We're going to talk about plan all-cause readmissions, which is a HEDIS measure adapted by CMS. We'll talk about that adaptation. One of the things we're not going to get into is every little detail of the technical specs of HEDIS. We're going to fly through that, but there are certain elements. In order to do well on measures, you got to know the details. NCQA owns this measure. It's a registered trademark, HEDIS. You're going to go to their technical specs. You're going to look for, you can buy the risk tables for free. You just have to download them from NCQA, which tells you the weights classes for the readmission measure. FAQs are something you look up monthly. NCQA updates things in real time, gives you updates to things that might affect readmissions or other measures. Ask your auditors. They're the best resources, and you can always send a question to NCQA. If you're always looking for guidance for CMS, if you're new to this kind of thing, where do these measure specifications come out of? You go to cms.gov, you find the page for Part C and D performance data. Technical rules are there. There's an appendix section explaining the details of the readmission measure. I'm going to go through that today, but that's where you can get your resources. So really quick, as I'm speaking very fast, I apologize, but I want to get to the meat. We're going to do a quick review of methodology, just so people level set some of the items about how this readmission measure is calculated. First and foremost, for Medicare, it takes all members. It applies to all members 18 and above in the population. And here's a critical element. The member for the discharge has to be enrolled 365 days prior to the event and 30 days after discharge. So if you're a plan that's growing, and let's say you get 10,000 new members in January, some big thing, those members may affect your Medicare operations. Your case management team might be working on them. There might be a lot of focus on these new members, but until they're with the plan for quite a long time, they don't show up in this readmission measure. And I think that's the kinds of elements you want to understand. Are you focusing your membership and your projects on the right members if you're focused on star improvement? Population-based interventions, case management, you got to do it all. But when we're talking about stars, you want to make sure you're focused on the right people. So the denominator, it's based on hospital stays. I will use the term stays, discharges. Sometimes I use members incorrectly because member can be in the measure multiple times. If they get admitted in January, come back in March, come back in November, that's 3 different events. So each event is evaluated for the 30-day readmission. And so the denominator is based on how many hospital stays you have in the year. There's some exclusions and the like, certainly relevant. You want to look at direct transfers and understand those rules and the specifications, because those are the things that are different between HEDIS and how your team might be reporting that for medical management and KPIs. Definitely a lot of details in that. But basically, we're looking for acute inpatient and observation stays happening between January 1st and December 1st of the calendar year. Note that I said observation stays. That was the big change a couple of years ago that CMS made, or actually NCQA made to HEDIS, to add that measure element in, because plans were contracting out stays, like almost everything was classified as observations, and it helped the readmission measure. So they decided, hey, regardless of contracting, we want to see all of those events. And so that's why they changed the measure. Readmissions, it's pretty simple. once they've discharged, does the member go back to the hospital within 30 days? Right? There's certainly any planned event is excluded, as noted here. One of the big things I wanted to note today and certainly reflect on that people miss sometimes is that it excludes outliers. So outliers are, for this case in Medicare, are 4 or more hospital stays in the year. So those actually, so the member that's most readmitted, the ones that you'd be obsessed about fixing in case management, they're in the high-risk case management programs, they're costing the plan a lot of money, they're excluded at the end of the year in the measure. So you might track them, see their performance, and then see that they drop out. And so what I wanted to show on this image is the idea that on the first column, we have total Medicare discharges in a year. So you've got that high risk group that gets excluded, the 4 or more visits. You got other risk categories. And this isn't every plan, but the high risk case management tends to focus on those sickest patients, the most costly patients. They can't necessarily staff everyone. There's certainly programs about care coordination and the like for the population, but generally that's the case. And what I want to note at the bottom is there's this other category of new members that don't fall in the measure that your health plan might be focused on, might be monitoring, measuring, and evaluating for medical management principles, but they're not in the measure. And so when you want to talk about performance of a STAR measure, you want to focus in on who's in that measure, why they're in the measure, why they're excluded from the measure, et cetera, so that you can compare programs of interventions and strategies for that STAR level versus medical management strategies, overall population-based strategies. That doesn't mean the first is wrong and the other's right and vice versa. It's just, if we're going to talk about, like, I want you to perform well on the STAR measure, if you're missing out on the wrong people because your program focuses on other people, just to let you know that, like, you got to talk about budgets and staffing and the like. So that's what I wanted to get from that vision. Okay, 2 critical concepts that will flow back into how STARS ratings is calculated, and they're not that misunderstood, but first and foremost is observed readmission count. This is just the classic, how many people got readmitted within 30 days in the year. It's just basic idea, which is what everyone looks at as a member goes to the hospital, did they get readmitted in 30 days, and keeping track of that. I call that the observed rate because we see it, they're members that we touch, we know it happened, we track that data in our claims and in our information. That's different than what we also will be counting in STARS, which we talk about. We'll talk about this twice. So I'll start here. Expected readmission count. So now we have, as we take all the members that were admitted to the hospitals and we look at them and say, okay, what was their diagnosis? Are they male? Are they female? How old are they? What other comorbidities do they have? Did they have COVID, discharge, et cetera? And we will score those members. And each member will get a score of it from 0 to 1. So it's decimal places, basically meaning from 0 risk for readmission to 100% risk for readmission. Most members are going to fall somewhere in the 0.23, 0.45, whatever. But here's an example. One member gets a 0.5 risk score. Another member gets a higher risk score of 0.8. Another similar high risk score of 0.7. For those 3 members, if you add their events, their risks up, it equates to 2. And the way CMS, and I mean, why he just counts for that is they're going to call that, like, that's your expected count of readmissions. So for those 3 members, we expect, based on their risk strata, their case, their experience, their diagnoses, we expect 2 of them to be readmitted within 30 days. That's the logic of that. It's very important that that counts, that you understand that that's part of the process of understanding your readmission rate. Okay, now we're going to get into talking about specific rates and how that leads into getting a STAR score. The first and foremost is the one that everyone uses. It's the observed readmission rate, and this is the basics. This is what everyone thinks of when they think of readmissions. They say, okay, how many people were discharged? Out of that, how many people got readmitted? We divide the 2, we create a rate. Here's the example that I want to give. There's 2 plans. They have the exact same number of hospitalizations, 1,500. They have the same exact readmissions, 300. And the observed readmission rate is just 300 divided by 1,500. It's 20%. you see decimal places used in some places, you'll see percents used in other places, but most of the time we talk about in percent. So for Plan A and B, their readmission rate observed, real people, real discharges, no risk scores, stratifications, et cetera, is 20%. And we'll use that example as we run through the other ideas. Okay, now we're going to talk about a ratio that we look at between observed and the expected. So I explained the expected at a high level. And now what we're going to talk about is what they call the OE ratio. And I'm sorry about all these forms, but this is straight out of HEDIS. So this word, this OE, is observed to expected ratio. And basically what it's looking at is, are you having as many readmissions as expected, more than expected, less than expected? So this is the score that determines that. So they take your observed readmissions, and for these examples, it was 300, remember? But then they said, based on the members that were discharged, the 1,500 people, each one of those had a risk stratification done. And based on their risk categories, we can then reclassify them and weight them and then add that up. And for Plan A, they have a slightly higher risk group. And so they have 350 expected readmissions out of the 1,500. For Plan B, they have 275 expected readmissions. So you can see that there's a plan. Both of them have the observed readmission of 20%. But as if you do it from an expectation standpoint, based on the health status of the member, the age, et cetera, there are different population levels of how much risk we have in a plan, right? Same with risk stratifications for payment. So here's the example again. The OE represents how well a plan is doing. Are we doing better than expected, worse than expected? Here's another look at it. If 300 readmissions was observed, I said it was 20% of the population. If you take the expected value, which is the count that we've determined was the expected number of people that get readmitted out of the population, it equates to 23% for Plan A, but is only 18% for Plan B. So what you can see is now Plan A is 20%, which is better than expected 23%. Plan B is 20%, which is worse than expected at 18%. And then we go back to look at the OE score, and we can see that that's reflected in the OE score, which is a decimal place score, but I put it in percentages so you could think about that. So 8.85714, and by the way, it goes to the 10th decimal place in these calculations, but we won't worry about that. 86% OE versus 109% OE. So what does that mean? So if an OE of 1, exactly 1, it means that the plan is doing exactly as expected with that population. So if I expect 350 readmissions based on the health status of my members, and I get 350 readmissions, I'm doing just as expected with that population. If my score goes below 1, 0.857, I'm doing better than expected. If my number goes above 1, like 109%, I'm doing worse than expected. And so Plan A and Plan B have the same level of readmissions, the same population of admissions, but because of the risk expectation, it looks like Plan A is managing their risk of members better. All right, and hopefully that's understood. Next up, I'm going to talk about the STAR score. So I hope you gathered where we go. What's most important is this observed to expected ratio. It is the crux of the STAR measure. If it was up to me, we would all use OE as the measure we look at and we talk about, but nobody knows it, so we can't really go to a provider and say your OE is a 1.2 and you're in trouble versus, we want you to be at 0.87. That doesn't make any sense to anyone. So we do these STAR level scores and the like. But what I want to warn you on, the STARS for score takes this OE value, which is your expected ratio, which is how well you're doing with your population, as expected, below expectations, high, above. And it takes a standardized national average of the scores of all plans' performance, and they multiply it. And so what it means is, so last year's STAR rating, it comes out on the tech specs. This is in the tech manual in the appendix area. The national average was, and look at how many decimal places they report, 0.11, right? 11% was the national average for this score for plans. And so what they want to do with this is they want to standardize the points. So they take each plan's OE number, which is a factor of how well you're doing to expectation, and tie it to something that's standard for all plans. So the OE is applicable and can be compared to everyone else. I hope that you understand this. So for Plan A, the OE is 0.857, right? 0.86%. That's multiplied by the national average, which comes out to be 0.0949 or 9%. Plan B, we take the OE of 1.099, and we multiply by this standard number, and we get 12%. So now we've taken that difference of expectation and applied it to a standard number 11, right, 0.11. And we've created this score of 9% and 12%. And if you don't learn anything else in this 30 minutes, here's my takeaway from this, is this number doesn't mean anything to people. When we go around and we say my readmission score for stars is 9%, what everyone thinks, that means I only have a 9% readmission score rate. That is not true. Or 12%, right? These two health plans have the exact observed readmission rate of 20% of their Medicare members that fall into the HEDIS measure. Not 9, not 12, right? And so what is 9 and 12%? It's not a real number. It's not tied to individuals that are in the plan. It's not tied to the actual scores of the value. It's tied to this difference between how well I'm doing versus expectation. So, like, you know, that's the whole point of this, what I want to get across. And I want to show you some numbers that sort of explain it further. But my point of this all is people get mixed up. And when we start obsessing about the final star number, we think it means percent of readmissions, and it's not. So let's go through the first example. Remember I said that if the OE, which is observed cases minus expected cases, is 1, that means I have 350 readmissions. I expected to have 350 admissions. It's exactly as expected. My score of OE is 1. I multiply 1 times the national average, and I get a 0.11 or 11%. You see that where it falls in the middle. So I've reversed engineered like the percentiles of star scores, and up above it, this is the national standards for like what is an OE score for 11% is 1. An OE score of 10, a star score of 10% would be an OE of 0.909, right? These are rounded up. I hope that makes sense. So now we add like plans that are doing better or worse. So plans that are doing really badly, right? This plan example was they have 350 expected readmissions, but they had 525, right? Way above what was expected. So that's a 1.5 OE, which means that 150% of what they expected to do is what their score was. And so what happens is you multiply 1.5 by 0.11, the national average, and their score is 17%. And then on the other side, a plan that's doing really well, they only had 175 readmissions, but their expected score was 350, count was 350. They're at 0.5. It's like half of what they expected would have happened. Their score translates to 6%, right? So you may not be a math person. You don't need to know all the math. But what you need to understand is the scoring of stars in readmissions is obsessed and looking about this expected risk score. So the risk score of every member and how then you manage those members to meet the expectation or surpass it. So if a member's high at risk, did you avoid their admission? If they're low and they got readmitted, it's even worse, right? So that's the status of this. So let's go back to our examples. I'm running out of time. So let's go to the example. So group A has remember they had 300 cases. And I put the star level now at the bottom, and you see where they fall at 9%. Their OE was was calculated before. I didn't put it on here, but you can see where they fall. But the plan values, you can extract based on the OEE values, which are standardized for everyone by star level. And you can say, okay, they had 300 readmissions, but if I look here, 223 for this plan would have put them at a 5-star. So that difference between 323 is not that great. So now I can actually say how many cases they needed to have performed better to actually get to a 5-star. So the other takeaway I want you to understand is you can reverse engineer the math, go backwards in the other direction, and figure out what is the actual observed rate I need to have for my plan to do a 5-star, because it's not going to be the same. So as you can see, a 223 count readmission is a 5-star for this plan. But for the plan B that I gave example, only 175 is 5-star. And so the performance level expectations are different. They have to do extremely well to be a 5-star. They're currently a 2-star. And so that's really what I want you to take away from this, is that we want to focus on my plan's expected value, how well I'm doing that in real terms of real members and observed cases to that expected value, and then extrapolate that to a star score and goal. So your goals are not don't even look at the star number. I'm 11%. That's meaningless. Look at what your OE is and look at the counts that apply that to your plan's risk stratification. And you can determine all of this at the member level, at the provider level, at the plan level, and do all of this math pretty simply. Remember, so here's plan A. So plan A, remember, they both had the same 20% observed readmission. For plan A to be a 5-star, they just need to have an observed readmission rate of 14.9%. Plan B would have to go from 20% readmission to 8% readmission to get a 5-star. So this also helps plans understand, like, based on my risk stratifications, maybe I need to do more, or maybe 5-star is not even reasonable for this population. To get a Medicare readmission down to 8% this is real readmission. That's a challenge. Okay, so I hope you got that. I'm just going to quickly run through risk weighting, just so you understand it, because I want to talk a little bit about how that affects the scores. But the big takeaway was what I went through already. The risk weighting, the HEDIS numbers are assigned, every member stay, the stay, not the member, gets scored based on whether there was an observation, based on the gender, their age, discharges, and the like. If you want to know these scores, there's a free table. You buy it from NCQA and download it, where you can order it at my NCQA, and you can look at the weights. You can determine that. And what's really cool about that is with your HEDIS engine or other platforms, you can score every individual member. So you could know your actual risk score for every member and use that for your projects. This is not that critical for you to know, but mathematically, there's a logarithmic formula. So just know that that exists. And here's the takeaway. Each member gets a list of weights. It might be positive, it might be negative, it might be in the middle, and the like. It's the logarithmic formula. Basically, just translate that between a 0 and a 1. 0 means 0 risk for readmission. 1 means 100% risk for readmission. So you don't see 1s, you don't see 0s. Everyone usually falls in the latter half, but I gave you some examples here where under each case, they are translated to a risk level. These numbers are the numbers that get added up to create the plan level risk score. So you could do the same in a provider. If you had 30 members and you know the risk score, you can add it up and say, doctor, your expected count of readmissions was 30 last month and you had 42, or you had 12, you're doing great. Like, you can actually extract and evaluate your performance at those levels. It's added up. The final score is all the different adds up. And so this, what I like about this is expected values is determined based on reaching a very specific number. It will change as you get more diagnoses, but you can look at January's performance this year and do this evaluation because the 30-day window is closed, score it, know who they are, know what they're doing. Better to do 2 years of data, but if you have 1 month of data, start evaluating who's in what case category, what is their risk stratification, what is my plan's level of expected readmission rates, maybe my provider's ranked, and how might I address that? One of the other points I want to make, I think I took it out of the slides because I didn't have much in here, is that ironically, the member that has the greatest impact on your score is the lowest risk member. So mathematically, their readmissions cost the plan more per member than a high risk, because in high risk, the readmission is as expected. The low risk, it's not expected. So it's actually flips it on its head to say, who should you focus on? If this was not a medical management project, we'd be focusing on everyone in the green category, right? Because those are the ones that cost us the most problem if they're readmitted. So I would definitely evaluate each group for your strategies. And this is an example. Yeah, I do have the example. So here 76, 43, and 9. Every member has a different probability of readmission. Oh, I'm trying to go down. Okay. So just for some takeaways. We went back to the original idea, which is you've got a population-based project and program, and not everyone in your population is in the measure. It's particularly those highest risk members that have 4 or more readmissions, they're off the top from the beginning. So you're going to want to make sure when you evaluate medical management and case management and whether it's doing well for stars, not whether it's doing well for the health plan and finance, but stars, are you touching the right people and when? Then what you can do is shift towards member level information shifted and reviewed in different ways. But who's a low risk member? Let's look at all my low probability members that got readmitted. Why? Because that's a pretty big deal mathematically. But any readmission matters, right? So you're still going to focus on your highest risk for readmission because you got to avoid those readmissions. So here's my takeaways for strategy. You start scoring every member for those risks. You then compare it to how case management stratifies them. Then what you want to do is start looking at this data and say, does my program meet my stars needs, right? Not whether because this is a star strategy, not whether I do well in medical management. And, but many times when I do consulting, we find that they're focused on not the wrong people, for stars, the wrong people, right? And do reverse scoring. Do not focus on the star measure. Start calculating your expected scores, and then determine actual real readmission counts that you can go to your medical management team and say, you're observed as 20%. I need you to be at 18% to get to a 4-star. You can translate that into a real number of cases per month, number of issues, so you can track and evaluate how well and how close you are. This is very doable. And finally, data completeness matters. The critical point of that is this. If you're not getting all of your data into the HEDIS engine, if your hospital's tables aren't giving you all of the if your claims doesn't give you every diagnosis, you might be missing comorbidities, the proper principal diagnosis categorization, et cetera. And what happens is members' risk stratifications are wrong. And you want that to be as high as possible accurately so that then you're getting fair treatment in your assessment. And look at my example, it has a huge impact. So I've tried to do this in 30 minutes. I appreciate you sitting for a couple minutes left so I can finish this. But I wanted to really just quickly dive into the deep end, but not take too much time. Here's my contact information. You have a question, please email me. If you want to have a quick meeting, I'm happy to talk about your plan. Don't forget to sign up for the next Summer Star series. I really appreciate you listening to this. What I'll do, and I guaranteed that this would only be 30 minutes, but I knew there might be questions and answers. So what I'm going to do is thank those people that want to leave, appreciate your attendance. If you want to be part of any kind of QA discussion, we're happy to continue for a few minutes and go through that. But hopefully you get a lot from that presentation and take away some really critical points that you need to re-examine your STAR score. Thank you for that.